Today's topic is around generative AI, but it promises not to be your usual webinar. We're going to mix things up. We'll have some fancy content. We'll mix in some interactive polling. We'll have panel discussions. It's going to be awesome. So keep it locked and we'll jump right in. We are the three of us that are on the screen. I'm so honored to be joined today by Readiness, the Executive Director at RSGI, and Jay Executive Director at 6 Parsecs. I will not spend a lot of time going through their bios because they really need no introduction. They are among the foremost thought leaders that are very, very close to every initiative and every movement in the legal industry, both on the law firm side of the house, on the in-house general counsel side of the house, as well as across the supply chain of technology providers and others in various forms and through their personal interactions and many years of experience. And so I'm so honored to have them here. I'm going to switch over to a poll because this is sort of going to give us a little bit of practice on how to do this. And so I will put a poll on the screen, and the link will also go into the Zoom chat. Ashley will help us out with that. But I want to present the first question here, which is really just, let me just share my screen real quick, which is simply this. In your view, what is the prevailing attitude towards generative AI within your organization? If you have your phone and you'd rather just snap the QR code, you can feel free to do that. But the link will also be going directly into the Zoom chat. And so you can feel free to do that. So in your view, you guys can see this, right? Great. Mm-hmm. You can join the polls according to the link. And it's always fun to sort of, as Jay says, kind of watch the horse race. And actually, Jay, I will give all future hosting of polls over to you, as we had discussed, and I had forgotten until just now. So yes, monitoring with interest. Can't wait to get bionic. Mostly skeptical. Again, I'll just call out that this is regarding the attitude towards generative AI within your organization. And so you're speaking on behalf of your team here.
So while folks are getting onto the poll and just kind of getting used to the tool, this is a super fun format I like to use in a lot of my workshops. Our intent behind this today, before we launch into our talk track, we have lots of content, lots of discussion. We want to hear from you on what you're seeing, what you're hearing, how you perceive, the thoughts and feelings of your stakeholders across the organization. I think this question is really important. This webinar is called Decisions of First Impression. AI readiness for legal leaders, right? For all leaders, I think managing change is a perennial challenge. It really begins with being attuned to the, kind of mood and sentiment of the organization. Any change business, we're in the feelings business. And then so I think that being aware and paying attention to what people are thinking and feeling is super important. So I see we have 30 votes here. I think we'll let it run for just a few more seconds. The next question is a different format. You're going to get to talk a little bit about your own feelings and thoughts, and that will be a free text format. And we really do want this to be an opportunity for you to get a temperature check on what others are seeing and feeling also. Part of that reason is, Ed and I have been very excited about, this blistering pace, furious pace of developments in generative AI. He and I separately and together have been tracking, developments in legal tech and innovation for quite a few years, and we're very excited. But even though it is one of our top priorities, we are very overwhelmed. We can't believe kind of the volume and pace of breaking news, all the stuff that's coming in. And what we're hearing from our many conversations with in-house leaders and law firm leaders is that they feel exactly the same. They're overwhelmed. There's a lot of noise. It's hard to find the signal. And then so I think that, the way we would characterize the greatest need that legal teams have in this period of rapid and drastic change is a sense of coherence and alignment, firstly, within your team, so that you have a shared, kind of sense of truth and read on the reality of where we are today as an organization and what all this change means for us, how we can chart a path forward toward a vision that will survive contact with our reality. So this is a word cloud because I did want everyone to get a little bit of a feel for the vibe. And you can see that no one word is really jumping off. And I think that's really indicative. There's a wide range of reactions to what we're hearing. I think that goes to, just some of the points I was making. Exciting is one, excited is another, transformative is another. And then so along with these kind of high expectations, I think we also are already hearing a little bit of backlash to that excitement, a lot of skepticism maybe from certainly veterans of past waves of, kind of technology hype and talk about disruption. And then so, we want to start with giving you our view, Factor's view, the 6 parsecs view, and my personal view, and to hear from Rena on how she's reading the board here. But let me say a few more words about empathy and feelings before we get into the techie stuff. I just want to note, I definitely want to forget about COVID. I want to pretend it never happened. It was, F-1 star, do not recommend. But the truth is that we have been living through extraordinary times. It has been a crazy run of really anomalous years, not only for business and work, but for people. As human beings, we have been through a lot the last 3 years. And then that has filtered through, I think, socioeconomic conditions, geopolitics, and that has hit the legal market in very specific and tangible ways. I think 2020 was a very hard year, but 2021 was an exhausting one. I think that's the year that legal teams, by and large, did about 15 to 18 months of work in 12 months. And then so we went into 22 very exhausted. And then there is a replanning focus, a focus on the future. And then so I think, though, this leads us into 2023, which I would characterize as a fourth anomalous year in a row. And here we will not bury the lead. Certainly, we think that generative AI is a big deal. It's something worth paying attention to because we believe that the impacts will hit 80% of the corporate legal wallet. I know that is a drastic, kind of dramatic statement. So we don't want to bury the lead, but we will walk you through this analysis in detail in just a little bit. But we want you to know what we believe. And because we think the window of opportunity is here and the stakes are very high, and I think the pressure is on leaders to kind of get ready for decisions of first impression, we believe that the most successful leaders will bring an ability to make sense of what's going on. But along with that, they are going to bring the sensibility, empathy for their stakeholders, a different way of relating to your team, to your stakeholders, the businesses that, in-house corporate legal is trying to enable, as well as your stakeholders and partners across the legal supply chain. So Sense and Sensibility is the thematic title of our content around this topic. And I think with that, I will hand it over to Ed to now help us make sense of what's going on in the tech space.
And we always want to level set when it comes to generative AI, but we also understand that many have also level set before us. The reason why, in short, we believe generative AI is so transformative, why would a technology capability result in reshaping 80% of the corporate legal wallet? It's because of the nature and the speed of the technology. The nature of this tech ultimately comes down to this. Language is a central tool of our trade. Lawyers do not produce work primarily when we're doing legal work. It's not in PowerPoints, it's not in spreadsheets, it's not in computer code. Legal work happens in language. It is the gray area, it is the interpretation, it is the nuance of words in laws, in disputes, and in contracts. All legal work is uniquely language-centric in a way that other functional areas inside of a company are not as exclusively language-centric. What we believe generative AI can do, among many things that it can do, 4 of the capabilities that really apply to legal work is its ability to read user-generated content, emails, Word, documents, PowerPoints, memos, briefs, motions, contracts, everything that we have created in our archives, its ability to research, ingest all of the information on the internet and across the online legal information databases, and not just research across it through a Google-like or Westlaw-like or some type of search, but actually to curate and analyze and apply the most relevant authority to the facts of the legal matter at hand. The ability to operate. And when we say operate, what we mean is to interact and to communicate and to execute and allocate workflow. The ability for generative AI to be able to recognize those patterns, live inside of the communication layer, respond and speak to us over emails and chats, and increasingly, in vocal conversations. And then the ability to draft. This is not just drafting summaries and meeting notes. This is drafting technical legal content, the ability to create a novel first draft that is not previously templated. It's not a fill in the blank exercise, but a novel first draft that is indistinguishable from that was created from a legal professional. And so the ability to read, research, operate, and draft is what it's going, and you're going to see that those 4 capabilities again. This is just, I won't spend much time here. There's something called the emergent theory behind sort of generative AI. But the thing to understand here is that generative AI is not a product that was released with features that were made for specific use cases. Generative AI is being discovered and not designed by putting more and more larger and larger data sets and putting more parallelized compute against it. And even as we sit here on this webinar, as we speak, the foundation model makers are enhancing their models. The next GPT-5 and Llama 3 and the next major models are being worked on with even more data, with even more compute. And what we're finding is that it doesn't just take things from good to better, but it's discovering new capabilities that we hadn't even imagined. And the pace at which those things are going to arrive require us to hold on to what we know, but to hold on to it very loosely. There are ways that it's already breaking into our world in wealth management, in pharmaceuticals. AI is designing its own chips that's enabling its own, fueling its own kind of blistering pace. And we know that big tech companies, the major tech players are focusing and shuttering other initiatives just to invest into this. And it's showing up already in our world and in our enterprises, on the revenue side of our organizations. And it's not without risks. And there are many sort of discussions about risk that are out there, regulatory accuracy risks, as well as data protection and bias risks. Some of these risks are technical. We believe those technical risks will resolve over time. There are already a lot of techniques being implemented around accuracy and prompting and making it to get sort of better answers, higher quality answers. Regulation is underway. But things like data protection and accuracy are problems that we'll either solve or risks that we'll learn to collectively assume and will become more normalized. Things like regulation and things like bias are more difficult because they require change to the human behavior, and it requires self-restraint. And those are things that will always sort of be pushing up against the lines and the fences that we create for this collectively. But the biggest risk is the risk of inaction. Not doing something outweighs all of these risks. And so we want to jump into a poll very quickly, once again, and we just want to see from you all whether or not, come on, poll, where are you? Whether or not you see what the likely impacts might be of generative AI. So Jay, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, I think certainly I think we have an audience here who's been paying attention to a lot of the developments. So taking into consideration everything you've seen and heard out in the market, and then what you've just heard, what do you think is the likely extent of impacts on both the practice and business of law, let's say in the next 2 years? And I think this temperature check is really important because I like the blue bar on the left. Those are my conservative, all bets are off, no idea. And then I think though it is pulling very strongly to the right, and certainly you know our views. But I think that the skepticism that we might see from our stakeholders, I see this pattern a lot in the rooms where I'm speaking, and I always worry that we're talking to the converted, we're preaching to the choir. Because when we go back to the office and we actually try to do something about this, we do have to contend with viewpoints across this entire spectrum. So I think this is a good temperature check. Ed, I'm going to turn over to you for our first kind of lightning round panel chat.
Great. And while the poll results can continue to come in, but Rena, let me turn to you. You've been tracking this space for a while. You've heard from a number of voices on this topic. You're always convening forums with really diverse and interesting perspectives at your events, in your consulting practice, at firms and in-house groups, and with product companies. From your vantage point, what has been your perception of the core technology? How has it evolved just even over the last few months? What are you seeing and hearing in terms of the impacts, current and expected, really on both sides of the kind of enterprise P&L?
Yeah, thank you, Jay, and thank you, Ed, and hi, everybody. Really glad to be here. And can I just say what a fantastic opening from my two panelists. Really enjoyed it. And I think, you've covered so much, and summarized so much of what we're seeing in a really, really pithy way. I loved your sentence, Ed, on Gen AI is discovered and not designed. And I think that we are in this unbelievable phase of discovery. Everybody is discovering, everybody is exploring, everybody's experimenting. I certainly, just to put it in context for some of you who don't know, my background, RSGI is a research and consulting firm. Probably the most famous thing that we do is we created the Financial Times Innovative Lawyers Program, which is global, and we do thousands of interviews a year. And a lot of my insights, my team have been talking in Europe and North America. We just finished our North American research. We've done near on 700 interviews with partners, general counsel, the whole ecosystem. And it's been extraordinary. And we've crunched through some of that data. We're also using generative AI, transforming our business. It's not just the lawyers, let's face it, it's changing every business model in the world. And Goldman Sachs, 300 million white collar jobs are going to be effective. We've got to remember that it's not just about the legal sector, but what the industry has been saying to us is, and it's quite interesting because some of these polls actually represent, I think, what we've seen across that big kind of group, is that there are very, very few people, less than 10%, that will say it will have no impact and it's irrelevant. And that's been extraordinary. It's been utterly different to anything that's come before. For me, running Innovative Lawyers, I've been running Innovative Lawyers for 18 years, and it's kind of like this is the moment that I've been waiting for throughout my career. This moment of inflection, this moment of change. So I would go with exciting, and that was the word that was coming up there. But what are they saying? I think one of the things that's really interests me whenever I go into a room and I say, have you all experimented with it? You've got every hand that raises. And you're talking about people in their 40s and their 50s and their 60s who would never normally all try a new kind of piece of tech. I think what has surprised me is the number of GCs and law firm partners who said it means profound business model change and have been up to thinking about it, are actually up to thinking about it. There's this partner at a law firm who runs a real estate group, big US, UK law firm, and said, should he buy the land registry in the UK? Is that he's thinking differently, thinking, oh, do I need to get into the data business? How is it all going to change? So I think it's moving very quickly. I think, obviously back in March, you saw some big moves with Harvey. I think most in-house legal teams and law firms are now experimenting with a range of LLMs. They're realizing that the LLMs have different functionalities and are good for different jobs. So nobody's putting their eggs all in one basket. They are obviously and I'll come to that another part of the session, but they are at different rates. And I think it's just evolving really, really, really fast. So it's hard to take a snapshot right now. But yeah, in-house legal teams, though, I would say, surprisingly, are possibly slightly slower than I would say law firms on this one. There you are. I'll finish there. My little controversial statement.
I love that. Jay, any comments on what Rena was talking about?
Yeah, actually, I'm going to double down on Rena's controversial statement. That is my feeling as well. And I do have a theory on why. I think we'll get into that in a little bit, but I think there's broad interest. I have to say lack of clarity on what to do next, and translating some of this feeling that something big is happening into concrete kind of plans on what we're going to do about it. And I think we're going to go cover those topics in just a bit. So I'll throw it back to you, Ed.
I will throw it back to you, Jay.
That's true. I think that was a really good segue into our planned flow. This webinar is called Decisions of First Impression. And I think that hesitancy between kind of knowing and feeling in our bones that something big is happening, and then taking the leap, taking the first step, comes from that feeling of magnitude, right? That the decisions we make now are going to have wide-ranging impacts over the long horizon on the future of our business, the direction of our business. We're uncertain what things are going to look like. And then so we wanted to give just like an overview of the scope of these decisions that are before legal leaders today. On the left, we have some macro factors that back into the general counsel's traditional role as strategic advisor to the enterprise. But truly in the midst of this fourth industrial revolution, which is what we're living in, right? These leapfrog advances in technology and science, they are in some ways getting ahead of our regulatory framework. I think in some ways that framework is deteriorating. And then so there's a new emergent legal and regulatory landscape. Lawyers have a big role in bringing that up to speed. And I think for the first time since I think maybe the second industrial revolution, it's the in-house leaders who have the most influence. I think the corporations that are pushing the envelope in these scientific and technological advances, it is falling to them to kind of bridge the gap between the current reality, the pace of advancement, and the pace at which law moves. Right. And then so I think you have to be attuned to that. And then within that framework or within that backdrop are immense opportunities for business disruption. So if you think back to the rise of railroads, to the banks, that was really the birth of the modern law firm as we know it. These questions of legal questions of first impression, kind of the invention really of the modern corporation. I think we're living through that time again, and that really means new business models. As Reno was saying, every business is having to contend with these threats and opportunities. Incumbents have to deal with new challengers. New challengers see new ways to get things done, especially because AI really dismantles historical ideas and equations of the cost structure of how we get things done. And then so it is a time of immense change in art. Those are really the forces that are shaping the strategy conversation within boardrooms. And there's a really interesting convergence where, I think GCs are feeling it. This is what I'm hearing from GCs, that they are much more involved on the revenue side of the P&L. They are much more, consulted and look to for guidance on how the company, the enterprise should navigate this landscape. So that's kind of the advisor side of the GC CLO role, right? But there's really immense opportunity to rethink the internal workings of the legal function and the legal supply chain. There's new ways of working for the law department to create value for the enterprise. And that means really understanding service levels, service models, interactions with the business. I think that has vast implications for the structure, roles, and skills that we need in the legal industry across segments, in-house and for outside counsel. And then really, I do think most law firms, the vast majority of law firms, the vast majority of legal tech companies really need to do a kill the company exercise where they go back to the whiteboard and really ask, what is it that we do? What are the client problems that we solve? And not just the customer that we deal with, the buyers we deal with, who are the end users of what we do? What's the new value proposition that they need? And how do we fit into that picture? And then so I think leaders across the legal ecosystem are really facing some high stakes decisions. Ed?
Thanks, Jay. I will speed through a little bit of this, but I think and there's a lot in those history lessons that I know you had to gloss over a little bit, but there were things that happened in the world that really changed the way that lawyers had to behave. When antitrust law was invented, when the Copyright Office existed, when things like that massively changed the way that commerce and economy works, and how lawyers had to respond. This is a fun slide, and I have to thank Jay for sort of the design ethic here, because this really takes us on a tour of science fiction, and I won't have enough time to talk about this. So just understand that this is C-3PO and R2-D2. This is Lieutenant Commander Data from Star Trek: The Next Generation. On the right, you have Tony Stark interacting with Jarvis, from the early Iron Man movies. And this is an arc over time. You see, starting in the beginning, Star Wars in the 1970s, really envisioning a collaboration where there are these members of the team trying to aid the rebel cause. In 20 years later, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, you see a bridge officer in Lieutenant Commander Data, whose only desire was to understand and solve the quandary of what does it mean to be a human. And then on the right, you have Jarvis, again, another 20 years later, and sort of the advent and manifestation of the Iron Man, films, where you see Jarvis and Tony Stark acting in this very inseparable way, where an easy equation to describe what is Iron Man in the earliest movies is that it's essentially Tony Stark, the inventor and the superhero and human, plus Jarvis. There's armor and there's gear and all this physical stuff, but actually that symbiosis is what generates Iron Man. You see this increasing intimacy over time. Again, the only reason we have this up here is because I think that science fiction is breaking into the imagination of science fiction is catching up to the I'll say it one more time. The reality of science is catching up to the imagination of science fiction. And the way that we had fantasized or hypothesized we might interact with increasingly intelligent machines have become cultural reference points that are sort of embedded into our brains. And I actually think that when you leave this webinar and after this massive overload of information, you think about what is generative AI and what's its definition, what it cannot do. I would actually not be afraid to pull out these reference points, because I think they're very instructive into the way that we collaborate, into the way that we think, and really see more personality emerging in artificial intelligence. And so it's very important to kind of have that reference point. I've got a quick poll before we this kind of divides our content sprint a little bit, but I want to know how many of you feel like you have a handle, how well you understand the demands of your direct reports. And then I also want to know at the same time how well your stakeholders understand the demands on you. So Jay, I'll hand it to you for the voiceover here.
Sure. I think, Ed introduced this idea of the, bionic team and how we might think about generative AI as a coworker. I think one of the first steps to actually doing productive experimentation with generative AI requires that we know ourselves really well. And that means like the work we have on our plates, right? And then so this idea of workload visibility is super interesting because and we see the bimodal distribution in each color, but you do see two colors pulling to different directions. We feel that we know our team's bandwidth and capacity and what they're doing quite well. And we often feel that the people who are asking things of us don't have that same level of understanding of what we deal with, right? And so this distance is something that is very much worth exploring within your organizations. And then this idea of workload visibility is just one of 6 dimensions that we have identified after lots of thinking on AI readiness. And so I'll turn it over to Ed to kind of speed through the other 5, kind of tell y'all about what that readiness model is.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. I think that's always a really instructive thing. It's just kind of an instructive exercise in kind of self-awareness and mindfulness to say like, well, I understand everyone else's work, but no one understands what I go through. And there's sort of like 2 sides of that coin to really think about as we are managing and directing our teams. AI readiness has 6 dimensions, and we hear a lot on these webinars about the tech and what the tech can do, what's under the hood and the features and how the skills that we need in the prompts and the engineering and all of that. and we don't hear enough about the human side of the equation, the readiness. And we think that this is not going to be change management as usual. Some people out there have been talking about a maturity model, like, you know, minimum, good, better, best. And I think that that can be useful, but it's a little bit binary. I think that actually the readiness model that we've prepared here indicates 6 different factors, many of which are dimensions or properties of your team today. Data and insight advantage, your ability to have a data supply chain and actually use it to make decisions. Expertise assets, people talk about knowledge management, the ability to centralize and make available the expertise and the knowledge specific to an organization. Change capacity, who on your team is ready to go right now to just try something new. Workload visibility, what we just talked about. How well do you understand what everyone's doing, right? Notoriously, people go in-house from law firms because they don't want to bill time anymore. It's like one of the big things. Okay, well then how else are you able to measure the composition and the actual quantity, the volume of the workload that your various legal professionals are doing? Talent resilience, how adaptive is your culture? What is your employee value proposition? How do you attract and retain and create engagement for the people on your legal team? And finally, decision capability. Can you make decisions at pace? Maybe you're good at everything else, but it's really hard to just get everyone together, get aligned, and deploy resources with authority and a mandate to go forward and do something. And that readiness results in 3 different archetypes. And I won't walk through all of these, but they kind of represent, you know, different advancements or investments and ways forward that we've experienced over the last 10 years. The people-oriented stability is what Jay likes to call the cradle of the legal department. The very beginning of a legal department is that here's a business and we need lawyers that work at the business. Let's go get a team. Here they are. It's a great group of people. They trust each other. They have each other's back. And the fact that they cover each other and they have each other's back and they're working together, they're in it for each other. That's what gets them through. And it's a generalist world and they kind of move and pivot and swivel. But that's got a certain limitation as the team's needs grow in size. And so in the advent of legal ops, we've seen, you know, an improvement focused ops sort of archetype where there's actually a lot more workload visibility, where we've looked at trying to get the right work to the right people at the right price at the right time, to understand the workload and to make sure that it's balanced and that someone's not burning out while someone's sitting idle. And then as you get even further right, you get to more of like an HQ centralized model where data is actually being gathered with some level of quality, with some level of accuracy and precision, as well as the centralization of expertise assets so that when people leave your legal department, they don't take the entire course of dealing and institutional knowledge with them, but there's a place where that rests in a very centralized way. And I think that we really want to talk a little bit about readiness, and the readiness, not just from a technology perspective and an exploration perspective. That's very, very important. We'll talk about that later as well, but also from this kind of this team orientation, this mental readiness. And so before we do that, I actually want to come back to the panel, and Jay, I think it's your turn to moderate.
Yes, and I'm gonna go to Rena because I was dying to ask her earlier when she said, you know, that her controversial view, a lot of departments seem to be a little bit behind law firms. So in terms of, you know, interest and readiness, what are some of the differences that you're seeing when you talk to general counsel or managing partners, when you talk to in-house counsel or law firm partners? Like, what are some of the differences that you are hearing? Rena, you're on mute.
Classic line. We have done quite a lot of work in terms of trying to analyze where people are. So we've got a kind of 3-bucket taxonomy, which basically goes, you know, there's a bucket of people that are getting ready, they're going steady, and then they're go, right? So a bit of alliteration there. And in the in-house space, in the kind of getting ready bucket, if you like, you've got your risk managers, and these are the in-house legal teams that basically their main focus is on advising the business and getting the initial policies in place. You know, you've got a team like Nokia. It's gone through 21 iterations of their AI policy within the organization. And they're developing their legal expertise, they're sort of learning, they're sort of getting ready. But in terms of using Gen AI themselves in the legal function, they're actually nowhere. They've done a little bit of experimentation, but really not anywhere. And they're waiting for their tech vendors or their law firms or their, suppliers like Factor to actually to help them. So that's the kind of risk managers in the getting ready. In the going steady group, you're getting teams that are moving into saying, okay, let's be responsible leaders. Let's really kind of drive the business to be ahead in terms of its usage of generative AI. So it's that whole ethical kind of question. It's the governance. They're really sort of focusing on that. They probably set up centers of excellence, and they're more active in terms of their experimentation. So, I think you would have probably a good sort of 40% in that bucket, maybe 20% in the other bucket, maybe a bit more. And then you've got a few that are in the go category on the in-house side. And that will be maybe teams like Unilever, a few others. We're working with a group of 20 general counsel ourselves at the moment, trying to help them think through use cases and where they can be. And we're going to try and sort of formulate an idea of what does the generative AI-driven legal function look like. But these GCs have got very, very active groups. They've got an R&D group. They are pretty advanced in understanding what their use cases are. They are probably using it, in kind of pockets. I mean, in different places. I mean, some of the key sort of things that they're excited about in this go group, and they're thinking about what does the team look like, and I think you put it very, very well, Jay, when you said, you've got to ask yourself, kill the company. What happens if the company's right? So these guys are asking themselves that question. They're saying, okay, what if the business model of the company changes? What if the external frameworks change? And what does our legal function have to be? And this group of GCs are kind of going, actually, this is not about tech. It's not about tech transformation. It's about strategy. It's about function change. And they're in that sort of wonderful sort of overlap between tech and strategy. So that's kind of where the in-house teams are. But what I'd say is the balance, if we were going to use the same taxonomy for law firms, you've got more law firms in that go bucket. I'd say you've probably got a good 40% of them. I'm talking, I should also say, I'm talking about the universe of the top commercial law firms in the world. So the top 100 law firms in Europe, the top 100 law firms in the States and Asia Pac as well.
Yeah, on your law firm analysis, I couldn't agree more. I do have slides on that coming up, so I'm gonna, put a pin in that. But I want to go to Ed for kind of the boots on the ground view, because I think one reason this conversation is so interesting, and the reason that Ed and I are kind of like my meld buddies for years, is that we do tend to toggle between the boardroom and the front line, the line of service. A lot of times the good ideas, the good intent of organizational leaders does not survive contact with reality. There's lots lost in translation across the organization to the frontline teams. So fact is right in the thick of this, right? As a new law provider, and with all the work you've done in contracting especially, I think your preparedness has to follow similar lines, and your readiness has to follow similar lines of what we're looking at here. So tell us a little bit about what the teams need, right, to actually make this happen. Like what does readiness for people look like?
Yeah, it's a great question. Clients have been asking us a lot, and we've gotten just an insane amount of sort of proactive outreach and really productive conversations asking us for our house view, because Factor, unlike a lot of our peers, we are very much in the world of doing the in-house legal workload. And while we have a brilliant team of technologists and our own robust tech stack, we're not really in the business of selling technology. And so as a result of having the in-house legal workload and also being sort of buyers and users of legal technology and creators and developers of it, but not commercially on the revenue side, we're very much in the same position as in-house counsel. And so a lot of this advice is medicine that we have to take ourselves. And so as we look internally, what we have been doing is exactly what we believe is important. We're trying to walk the talk a little bit. Workload visibility. What is actually the work that's happening? And our clients ask for it because in the course of our engagements, we have, SLAs, we're accountable to it, we have to report on it. So we really have to get that right. We are doing a use case analysis and a brainstorm, but it's really more than just kind of trying to ask people where AI might be useful and trying things out. It's walking through process maps. And I have a background in product management. It's really a proper user story, user experience journey map that we're trying to do with several of our teams. I spent, many hours over the last couple of weeks with, 2 of our teams, another one coming up here, doing these workshops, listening directly to the personas, doing their work, spending hours in those workshops, looking at it, drawing on our time motion studies to have great visibility on the workload and to see where this is actually going to make a difference. And then we're also doing things to target the general consciousness of our organization and really trying to raise that with more awareness and staying current and really reporting out what we're seeing in the market, and the different decisions that we have to make. At the end of the day, the truth, like we're trying to own our truth and live, our own truth, which is that our solutions have to start with empathy and pain points. They don't start with tech features. They don't start with hammers looking for nails. They start with hands-on experience with the technology that unlocks the imagination, but really ultimately begins with the work. And that's the approach that we try to take with our clients. That's the approach that my colleague Michael Callier takes in the consulting work that we do with our clients. It's the approach that we are putting out into the world in webinars like this, because we believe that that's the right way forward. And that's what we're trying to do.
Awesome. I think I have the next content sprint, and I am really going to sprint through these slides because I want to kind of get to our wrap discussion on these slides. So we are now going to break down that 80% for y'all. I think a lot of people were kind of shocked at the 80% figure. Goldman Sachs at 44% of legal tasks will be impacted. We're saying 80% of the legal wallet, and I'll explain the difference in just a little bit. So on the next slide, what you are going to see is a very familiar visual at 3 kind of tier. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm skipping way ahead. So just a little bit of context on how we're thinking about the wallet. We do want to point out that professional legal buy is kind of young. ACC is only 40 years old. Buying legal counsel and the kind of introduction of procurement methods into legal buy is only 10 years old. And then clock, of course, is the youngest of the 3. But, I think these folks are doing great work in a very old system. A very old system that was designed in a different era with the lawyer really at the center. And rather than kind of talk about lawyer centricity as a property of lawyer personality, I want to point out that it does take time and it is very expensive to make a new lawyer. We are dealing with very limited supply of scarce talent. I think it's really easy to throw rocks and act like, lawyers are fungible. That's just not true. Really, as Rena was saying, the top commercial firms, if you kind of take the top tier of the maybe 300 or so law firms of consequence serving big corporations globally, this is scarce talent, right? And then so we have been dealing with that constraint for many decades. And then so we come up with things like leverage that solves the economics, makes the economics a little bit more palatable for the users and buyers. And the leverage model and the career progression, that pipeline really solves the need to train future lawyers, right? And this thinking is necessary, but it is lawyer centric. And we have been stuck in a kind of bespoke service model thinking where, legal teams solve one problem at a time for one client at a time. And that's kind of the backdrop that we're coming from. And the professionalized legal buy that is younger, for the last 30 years or so, the good work that ACC has done, truthfully, it has been a lot of cost containment, right? And then so I think we went through an era of sourcing strategies and labor arbitrage and really trying to contain costs that way. And then I think we've had maybe 10, 15 years of, the era of how I would call it, solutions, transformation, more technology. How do we create these solutions, right? And these are all responses to the more with less challenge, because there are twin pressures on the legal function. Workloads are going up, they're not going down. Budgets are finite, right? And then so this is kind of the backdrop of what we've experienced together as an industry coming into this. And then why is this time different? What will the next wave of change look like? How will that be any different? Then we get to the very familiar, I think, visual of the three, well, there's three here: better, faster, cheaper. One thing I want to say here is that, the direction of legal innovation has maybe not gone the way that general counsel's agenda would prefer. Better, faster, I think, is what CLOs would say is more important than cheaper. More value for money, right? Not necessarily same value or less value for less money, but cheaper is more clear cut. And then so I think that is how we have thought about legal innovation, whether or not that's how we want to think about it. And then so this time we want to think about it differently. We want to think about Gen AI differently. And then I'm trying to get to the money slide, and I think that is coming very soon. So from lawyer centricity, we're going to client centricity, right? And I do want to define what client centricity is, because it's not more client service. It's not more client service excellence. It's not more client is always right. We do everything for the client. We do the best work for all our clients. It really is about fit, problem solution fit, really deeply understanding the client needs as they experience it, they feel it. And then so I have some corporate examples here, some legal examples here. Disney and P&G are really interesting because they have portfolios of businesses. Marriott is really interesting because they actually have brand architecture, whether, business travelers, leisure travelers, they really come up with a set of needs and then they design offerings around those needs. I think Patagonia, Honest Company, are really oriented toward activities or values. TIAA, which is the Pension Fund for Teachers, USAA, Financial Services for Military Families, they're really going at the values and identity of the customer base, right? Quinn Emanuel, trial lawyers, that they have that logo. They do one thing and they do one thing very well, and that's their identity. Kirkland has built a amazing kind of machine for funds, right? And private equity. And then so, client centricity is not about being nice. It's not about client delight. It's not about loyalty. It's about understanding the needs of the customer. And then so I think if we bring that mentality forward to the current window of change, then we get to, the corporate legal wallet and how we might bring client centricity to that challenge. And then so what we've done here is take that familiar 3-tier kind of model of, best, better, good, or, cream, core, commodity, where at the top you have high stakes, legal complexity is the issue, about 15% of the corporate legal wallet. I really want to talk about the core though, the run the business work that, I think is where clients actually feel the most pain. This is where I think corporations remain most underserved. I'm going to ignore commodity for now. We're going to focus on the 95% of the corporate legal wallet and really think about, what does client centricity look like in the core? What are the needs? What are the problems? What are the pain points that clients experience, and how did they feel the pain? And I think really the controlling problems in the core are human factors. It's organizational complexity, it's scale complexity, because this is really a tranche that has high variance and complexity and scope and size on a per matter basis, right? This is a very mixed basket. And then so I think that law departments have had trouble kind of quantifying the systemic risks that accumulate over time, the unknown unknowns to operating risk, kind of the drag and friction that has P&L impacts, right? And those are really the pain points in the core. And I think this is where traditional technology and solution approaches have not succeeded. Products really need to solve one problem and have a rigid kind of design up front about how that work should go, and that places fetters on lawyer judgment, and it needs a small problem that happens over and over again without variation, or it requires big problems that occur intermittently. And I think that's actually better in the cream, but in the core, legal tech has not really provided the value it's promised because that client centricity is missing. That problem solution fit is missing. And that is why we believe that generative AI and its many properties, its capabilities, the ability for teams to create nimble solutions at the moment of need is going to have a huge impact in the core. In the core, we think about 85% of that work can be reshaped through integration of AI into bionic teaming. So we're not talking about displacement. We're looking way beyond displacement to first and second order impacts of doing that work differently, right? So Ed, if you go to the next slide, I think you can kind of see how we have mapped each of the AI capabilities to each of the value tranches. And we have some theories about what this might look like. But I'm going to pause here and kind of ask, Rena to comment on what I've said about the core and like, how do you feel about what I've said? Because this is what I heard from clients when I was sitting in the pricing seat at Baker McKenzie, talking to clients globally, that they were really feeling that pain in the core in the sense of not knowing what to do about it. You're on mute.
Green on mute.
I would agree with you, Jay. And Mary Shannon Carroll, who used to be the head of Clock, actually puts that the number of puts that 90%, not 80% of tasks being displaced. So it is quite dramatic. I mean, the best thing I can say is an anecdote. I sat with a legal team a couple of hours ago with the GC, the deputy GC, and the assistant GC, and we were doing a US company, a big US energy company. And we were doing a demonstration of Harvey, Lear, and Google Vertex AI. And we were going through what use cases could this legal function have with these products, these different products that could do different things for them. And it was just, how long is a piece of string? There was so many coming out, and you could see everybody's eyes just widening up, open, and they were going, regulatory work, we can actually do compliance. And this particular legal function was responsible for had a wide remit in the business, had health and safety, had environmental protections, also compliance, all sorts of things, audit as well. And so I think that's absolutely right. And it was really like seeing a light bulb go on in these guys, because we would ask them to use one use case, and within 1 hour, we had 60 minutes. We had something like 25 use cases already, kind of like, oh no, we can use it for supply chain contracts. We can use it for our compliance policies. We can use it to, bots for frequently answered questions. We can put our documents into Harvey and then just get it summarized out. We can get the checklists out. It was so many things. It was like, it was all the activities that they do, actually. That was kind of key. So yes, one way of saying it's like I violently agree.
Yeah, and I think it's really helpful to have that viewpoint from the front lines and the concrete examples. Ed, do you want to go to the next poll for the audience? Because I do think that, after everything they've heard, I'm very interested to see what they think about the balance of power.
Yes, I agree.
So this poll is interesting. We're giving you a smaller rating scale, rating 1 to 5, where we're asking you to rate 3 things. What do you think is going to happen to the bargaining power on services pricing? So is it going to corporate law departments, or is it shifting toward the outside supply chain? And then recruiting power for talent. And we don't have a ton of time to talk about the talent value proposition, but I think that's a really interesting second order impact, everything that's going on. Who's going to be more empowered to recruit the best legal talent in the future? And then what is, the power to mandate change? Does it lie with the CLD, the legal function, or is it going to be, kind of push forward from the outside supply chain? Very interesting. Bargaining. So this is quite different from actually the last time we ran the poll, or no, the horse race is evening out. So recruiting, bargaining power of services, actually going to, recruiting power going to outside, bargaining power going inside slightly, and then power to mandate change going to the law department. I would actually put that recruiting power slightly more to the right. I think that's where I would see it. Rena, what do you think about this? Where would you vote?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting actually. I think because it's I think yes, I think it's a very interesting notion that corporate law departments will get more powerful. It's one of those things, if you're an observer of the industry, you're constantly saying, why aren't corporate law departments banding together and using their power? I've asked that question for the last 30 years. And maybe this will be the trigger. But I do also think it's going to be helped by business model change in the law firm, by dramatic business model change. I don't know if you can, you know, so the law firm will change and how it will change and what it will do. I mean, all law firms are going to have to be asking that, kill the company question. And will they get bigger? So I would actually struggle to predict where it would go. I think that you've got two sides going along. I mean, there's this whole training question, as everybody keeps asking me, what's going to happen to training in law firms? And I keep saying to people, the fact is people are going to be doing different jobs, so you're going to need to do different training. And this idea that the job will be different is very hard to conceive of, because we can't see what the job actually looks like for a senior lawyer, or a senior lawyer in-house, or a senior lawyer in private practice.
Yeah, and I think you only learn by experimenting. So maybe we'll just go to your panel chat, and so you can ask us anything you'd like, Rena.
Yeah. So I mean, I know we've only got a few minutes left. I mean, I'm actually interested to just turn that question back to you. Do you see the balance of power shifting dramatically to the corporate law department?
I really think I like your taxonomy of the 3 buckets. And then so I'm going to use my 3 bucket taxonomy. I think there's maybe 30 firms globally that do predominantly cream work. I think the balance of power will remain quite, similar. I don't think huge change there. I do see structural change in how they train and how they price, not the pricing level. In the core, I see a big swing to corporate law departments. That's how I would answer that question. I think though, if I think about the strategic moats, and I'm not sure I believe in moats anymore, because when change is this fast, I don't think moats are really effective. But for law firms, I mean, practice specialization has to be one. Those 30 firms that I talk about in the cream, I think what's helping them is really practice specialization, that they have that scarce expertise, right? And the other 2 moats are really going to be, you have to be great at client service, at this idea of client centricity. And that's for the vast majority of those 300 firms, right? 90% of firms heavily reliant on the core. I think they're facing headwinds that are pretty existential. And then so they really do have to shore up their understanding of client needs is what I see.
That's interesting. I mean, Jay, how about you? I might actually just turn the same question on you. I mean, how do you see the future of the legal ecosystem, including the factors of the world, the law firms, and the corporate law departments?
I think I think you meant Ed. I know we're almost the same person.
I say Jay, I meant Ed.
No, I know. In the last 0 minutes really remaining, what I'll say is that we actually have a hypothesis factor that there's always been this kind of prevailing problem that's existed, and as the world's continued to become more complicated, that the core work has these properties that they're both complex, but they're also very scaled. And we believe that we can attack that problem with a number of techniques at Factor, around integrating very deeply with our businesses, around bringing some of the best of traditional expertise along with some of the best process and innovation. Generative AI, in our belief, is absolutely going to be a massive game changer when it comes to that core work. And so I really believe that I agree with that. Maybe the last thing I'll just say, Rena, is something you implied, but I'm going to make overt, which is that training lawyers for the future, and this notion that there's going to be sort of this vacuum, because what's going to happen, these people will never learn how to do these things. I think the question is, well, will they have to do those things? Who's going to have to do those things in the future? And so I think redefining the work and the activities that comprise the work, this is what we're talking about when we say that there's going to be a reshaping of the spend. It's because there's going to be a complete redefinition and recentering of all the work activities. And so we believe at Factor that we're very much an extension of the in-house legal department, and that we take on those workloads and that we do them as a natural extension with greater efficiency and centralization, but also with deep integration. And we're really along for the ride when it comes to the core. We believe that there is going to be significant transformation there. That, like you said earlier, this is kind of the moment we've been waiting for as well.
Great. Well, I think we're kind of at time, so I'll hand back to maybe Jay or Ed to close us out.
Thanks, Rena. And we didn't get time to sort of get through a lot of the rest of this, but what I would encourage you to do, there is advice that we've got for everybody. Avoid the trap of doing nothing. The risk of inaction is greater than all of the risks. And instead invest very heavily into learning. There's a false binary that I'll either wait and see because we're kind of fast followers and we're not really going to do anything, or we're on the bleeding edge and we're totally going to do everything. And I think that there's a lot to learn right now. The pace of the technology continues to advance very quickly. What it's capable of today is awe-inspiring, but what it's capable of tomorrow will be exponentially more. And so experimentation, sharing, recentering, thinking about this future that we've defined, and then thinking about charting a path between here and there, understanding your current state and your readiness. We believe that these are no regrets activities that can start tomorrow. They don't depend on technology products presenting themselves. They don't depend on an RFP. They don't depend on certain facility or a new type of skill or talent or product market. They don't depend on knowing everything about the future. You can start doing this right now. And then we just ask you to stay in touch. One thing we're going to do is we didn't get a lot of chance to interact outside of the polls. Thank you all for your poll interaction. That was really, really helpful. But there's a QR code in the screen, and you'll get it over in a post email as well. We're going to try to hold office hours, just a couple sessions next week. If you want to talk to myself and possibly Jay and just sort of interact a little bit more, kind of we always take Q&A in these sessions, and it's like, well, some people need a little more time to process the information. And so we want to make ourselves available kind of for office hours, just to kind of talk to you all if you have other questions. There's more content and research coming. We published a white paper in which is a part 1. There's a highly anticipated part 2 that we're going to finally finish writing and get out there. And then just to drop a sneak preview, Rena mentions an initiative that she's doing with 20 GCs to really go deep. Jay and I have our favorite project ever that we want to kind of like preview. But really to stay tuned, that we really believe that model of learning together and kind of shared co-development is going to be something very, very important, that to enable each one of us to not go on all these like inefficient individual journeys, but to really combine our power and go on a shared journey together. So please stay tuned if you want to hear more. I'm being a little bit mysterious, but I'm really excited to talk to any of you sort of in person. Our LinkedIns have been dropped directly into the chat if you want to connect with us there. Rena, thank you so much for joining us. Jay, thank you so much for your contributions. And thank you for every single person that took the time to stay very engaged. I hope that you all have a wonderful day.